Captain Ethan Drake stood on the crowded trading floor, the hum of the space station's engines reverberating through the thick steel walls. His ship, the Phoenix, had just completed a grueling cargo run across hostile territories, and now he was looking for his next job. The port was bustling with activity as traders from all corners of the galaxy haggled for goods, exotic items, and supplies. The harsh glow of neon signs flickered above, lighting up the darkened corridors of the station, and the smell of strange alien spices filled the air. Ethan was used to the chaos of spaceports. He was a seasoned trader, a man who had seen the darker sides of the galaxy. He had bargained with criminals, dealt with shady smugglers, and even escaped the clutches of pirates more than once. But today, something felt different. His attention was caught by a figure standing alone near the back of the room. A strange-looking merchant, dressed in a heavy black robe that covered his face, was whispering in hushed tones to a small group of potential buyers. The merchant's hands were wrinkled, his posture bent and frail. Ethan couldn't help but feel something was off. As he watched the transaction unfold, the merchant gestured toward a young woman standing beside him. The woman, unlike the merchant, stood tall and straight. Her alien features were striking, with smooth, silvery skin that shimmered under the station's lights. Her large eyes, an unusual shade of violet, scanned the crowd warily, though there was a hint of something fierce in her gaze. Ethan couldn't quite place her species. There was something different about her, something that didn't quite fit the usual roles he'd seen beings of her kind play. Curiosity piqued. Ethan walked toward the merchant, his boots making soft clinks against the metal floor. He had no particular interest in buying anything today, but he couldn't ignore the peculiar situation unfolding in front of him. "Is this a slave trade?" Ethan asked bluntly, his voice low and cautious. The merchant's eyes widened slightly, though his face remained hidden beneath his robe. He cleared his throat. "Not a slave. No. I offer this, young lady, as payment for a debt owed to me." Ethan raised an eyebrow, confused. "Payment for a debt? You expect someone to buy her?" The merchant nodded eagerly. "Yes, yes, a fine servant. Intelligent, well-mannered. She has many talents. A perfect addition to any crew or family, sir." The woman did not flinch, though her face remained calm. There was a glint of pride in her eyes, but she said nothing. Ethan studied her, trying to gauge the situation. He had seen slaves in the past, forced to work, beaten down by their circumstances. But this woman didn't look like she belonged in chains. She carried herself with dignity, like someone who could stand toe-to-toe with the universe if given the chance. The merchant continued. "She was, how should I put this? A prize, a gift from a long-standing contract. But her value has diminished, and now she is of no use to me. Perhaps to you, she will be of better use." Ethan wasn't sure what to make of it. Slavery was something he despised, but there was something strange about this whole deal. He wasn't one to make rash decisions, but something about the woman, Nyx, as the merchant called her, spoke to him. "I'll take her," Ethan said, his voice firm. The merchant looked surprised. "Are you certain? She is quite difficult to manage. She has unusual habits, and her pride." "I'll take her," Ethan repeated, "but not as a slave. I'll free her." The merchant hesitated for a moment before handing over a datapad. "Very well, then. As agreed, the payment has been settled. She is now your responsibility." Ethan nodded and turned to Nyx. "You're free now," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "I won't keep you in chains, but you're under my protection until we can figure out what's going on." Nyx looked at him for a long moment, her violet eyes unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. "I am not what you think," she said quietly, "and I will not be a burden to you. But know this, Captain, I am not your typical slave. You may have freed me from one cage, but you are about to put yourself in another." Ethan felt a flicker of curiosity mixed with concern. Her words were cryptic, and her tone had an edge to it. What did she mean by another cage? But before he could ask, The merchant disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ethan alone with his new mysterious companion. As they made their way back to the Phoenix, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this decision, this unexpected bargain, would change everything. Nyx was no ordinary being, and her past was clearly more complicated than anyone had led him to believe. There was something about her, an intelligence, a hidden strength, that made her stand out from everyone else on the station. And as they boarded the ship and set course for the outer rim, Ethan realized that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. He had no idea who Nyx truly was, or what trouble she was hiding, but one thing was certain: this wasn't going to be a simple journey. The stars stretched out before them, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay hidden in the galaxy, and what role he and Nyx would play in the unfolding story. The Phoenix hummed steadily as it glided through the vastness of space, its engines purring like a well-oiled machine. Captain Ethan Drake stood at the helm, his hands gripping the control panel, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The galaxy stretched out before him, endless and mysterious, but his thoughts kept returning to Nyx. She had barely spoken since they left the station. She sat quietly in a corner of the cockpit, her violet eyes fixed on the stars outside, lost in her own world. Ethan couldn't help but wonder who she truly was. She was not like the typical slaves or servants he had encountered during his years of traveling. There was something about her, an aura of dignity and strength that stood in stark contrast to the situation she had been in. Ethan glanced over at her. "You haven't said much since we left," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was casual, but his curiosity was clear. Nyx turned her gaze to him, her eyes steady and unreadable. "There's little to say," she replied softly. "I'm not your responsibility. I will not be a burden." Ethan frowned, feeling a strange mixture of frustration and sympathy. "I didn't free you to make you a burden," he said. He stopped himself, realizing that he didn't really know what he was trying to say. "I just think you deserve better than what that merchant was offering." Nyx didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up and walked over to one of the large windows, looking out into the black expanse of space. Her movements were graceful, almost regal, as if she was used to commanding attention. Ethan couldn't help but notice how different she was from the others he had met. Her bearing, the way she carried herself, suggested that she had once been someone important. But who? After a long pause, Nyx spoke again, her voice soft yet carrying an undeniable weight. "You think you've saved me, but you have no idea what you've done." Ethan stiffened. "What do you mean?" Nyx turned to face him, her expression calm but intense. "I am not just a runaway slave, Captain. I am Nyx Alara, daughter of the Xerthian royal line. I was born to rule, not to serve." Ethan blinked, stunned by her words. He had suspected she was more than just a simple servant, but this was something else entirely. "Wait, you're a princess." Nyx nodded, the faintest hint of sadness crossing her face. "Yes, exiled, abandoned by my own people. My life is now a broken mirror of what it once was. I was supposed to marry the warlord Thranak to secure peace for my people, but I fled. Now I am nothing more than a fugitive." Ethan's mind raced as he processed her revelation. A princess, and she had been sold into slavery. The idea seemed absurd, but the more he thought about it, the more it began to make sense. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, there had always been something regal about her, something that set her apart from the others. Still, the thought of her being royalty left him with more questions than answers. "You're a princess," Ethan repeated, still trying to wrap his head around it. "And you were sold as a slave." "I was not sold," Nyx corrected him, her voice firm. "I was given as payment for a debt. The merchant you met was a broker, dealing in people, in lives. I was his possession, but not anymore." Ethan took a deep breath. This was more complicated than he had expected. "So, if you're a princess, what's your plan now?" he asked, trying to focus on the practical side of things. Are you going back to Exerthia to reclaim your throne? Nyx hesitated, her gaze shifting to the stars outside the window. I don't know, she said quietly. The throne is not mine to reclaim anymore. Too many have turned against me. Thranak, the warlord who was supposed to marry me, has taken control of the empire. He rules with fear, not wisdom. So, you've run away, Ethan said. Is that what this is about? You're on the run from him. Nyx turned back to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and resignation. Thranak is a tyrant. I refuse to be his pawn. I would rather die than become a tool of his ambition. Ethan felt a surge of sympathy for her. He had seen plenty of ruthless leaders in his time, but Thranak sounded like the worst kind. A tyrant who would do anything to get what he wanted, even if it meant destroying the life of an innocent princess. Then what now? Ethan asked, trying to get a sense of what Nyx was planning. Do you want my help? Nyx met his gaze, her eyes steady and filled with something that almost resembled hope. I don't know what I want, she admitted. I didn't ask for your help, but you've given me a chance. A chance to breathe, to think. Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into, but he knew one thing for certain. Nyx was not just any ordinary alien. She had a story to tell, one that was far bigger than anything he had ever encountered. As the Phoenix cruised through the silent reaches of space, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. He had taken in a mysterious alien, a princess no less, and he had no idea where this would lead. But one thing was for sure. He was in this now, and whatever came next, he would face it alongside Nyx. The stars outside the windows sparkled in the dark abyss of space, and Ethan felt a strange sense of anticipation rise within him. He had no idea what kind of trouble they were about to face, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Days passed aboard the Phoenix, the hum of the ship's engines the only constant in the vast emptiness of space. Ethan Drake found himself growing more and more curious about Nyx. She had not been forthcoming with details of her past, but as the ship made its way toward the distant trade routes, something happened that would change everything. It began with a strange encounter. The ship's sensors blared suddenly, a high-pitched warning that cut through the usual hum of activity. Ethan's eyes snapped to the control panel, his heart racing. The readout showed a fleet of ships closing in on their position. Too many to be a coincidence. A quick glance at Nyx confirmed his suspicions. She was standing in the doorway, her violet eyes wide, a look of deep concern on her face. Ethan's mind raced. What's going on, Nyx? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Who are they? Nyx didn't answer immediately. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She walked toward the cockpit, her posture tense and rigid. For a moment, she stared at the display screen, her breath shallow, before turning back to Ethan. It's them, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Them? Who? Ethan asked, confusion and suspicion creeping into his words. Her hands clenched at her sides as she looked out at the incoming fleet. The Xerthian fleet. They're here for me. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had known that Nyx's past was complicated, but this was different. The Xerthians weren't just some distant alien race. They were powerful, with vast resources at their command. Why were they hunting her? He looked at her, trying to make sense of her words. What did you do? Why would they send an entire fleet after you? Nyx hesitated, her gaze distant, as if she were battling a storm within. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but heavy with emotion. I was once the heir to the throne of Exerthia. My father, King Darwin, ruled with wisdom, but he was old, and the throne was being threatened by those who sought power. They wanted me to marry Thranak, a brutal warlord who sought control of the empire. I refused. I refused to let my people be ruled by him. Ethan felt his chest tighten. You refused to marry him. But why? I couldn't. Nyx interrupted, her voice low and full of pain. Thranak is a monster. He controls the Empire with fear. He would have used me to strengthen his rule, but I could never be a part of that. I fled, seeking refuge elsewhere. Ethan absorbed her words, the weight of her story settling heavily in the pit of his stomach. The princess had run from a marriage that would have cemented her position as ruler, yet she had refused to be a puppet to a cruel tyrant. In a way, it was a decision that showed incredible strength. So, they're hunting you because you refused to marry Thranak? Ethan asked, trying to piece everything together. Nyx nodded. Yes, they need me to return. If I don't, the Empire will fall into chaos. Thranak's supporters want me dead, or they want me back so he can control the throne through me. Either way, I'm a threat to his power. Ethan's mind was spinning. He had never imagined that a chance encounter with a mysterious woman would lead him into the midst of such a dangerous political web. And yet, here he was with Nyx, an exiled princess with the future of an empire hanging in the balance. Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed through the ship, followed by the shrill screech of metal against metal. The sound was followed by alarms blaring, and the ship shook violently. Ethan was thrown forward, catching himself on the control panel. The lights flickered as the ship shuddered under the assault. They found us, Nyx said with a cold certainty. They'll stop at nothing to capture me. We need to act quickly. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to his feet. What do we do? Nyx's eyes flashed with a steely resolve. We fight. Fight. Ethan was taken aback. Against an entire fleet. How are we supposed to do that? Nyx turned and began to move toward the ship's weapons controls, her movements sharp and purposeful. You have technology. We can't match them in size or strength, but we can outsmart them. Ethan followed her, his mind racing. He had no idea what Nyx's plan was, but he trusted her instincts. She had proven herself resourceful already. As Nyx worked quickly, setting up the ship's defensive systems, she glanced at Ethan. We'll need to be fast. I know the weaknesses in their fleet. I can help you target the ships that pose the most danger to us. Ethan felt a surge of respect for her. She was a princess, a royal figure, yet here she was, taking charge and guiding him through a battle. He had expected someone frightened, someone desperate, but instead he was seeing a leader, one who had been forged by hardship and loss. We'll need to move fast, Ethan repeated, his voice steady. He took his place at the control panel, his fingers flying across the buttons as he activated the ship's systems. Outside, the Xerthian fleet was closing in, but Nyx was right. They could still outmaneuver them. Ethan sent a few preliminary blasts to disrupt their communication systems, buying them time. Nyx guided him, her voice calm, even as the alarms continued to blare and the enemy closed in. We have to make them think we're a bigger threat than we are, Nyx said, her words cool and calculated. Use the stealth capabilities of your ship. Create confusion. Then we strike. Ethan nodded. Understood. As the battle began, the stars outside the window became a blur of flashing lights. The Phoenix danced through the chaos, darting in and out of enemy fire, its systems humming with calculated precision. Ethan's heart pounded as he followed Nyx's instructions, trusting her completely. In that moment, he realized just how much she was capable of, and how much he had underestimated her. Nyx wasn't just a fugitive princess. She was a warrior in her own right. And together, they might just stand a chance. The Phoenix zipped through the blackness of space, avoiding enemy fire with a speed and agility that even Ethan had to admit was impressive. The Xerthian fleet, though larger and more powerful, was now forced to react to the unexpected movements of the ship, creating confusion among their ranks. Ethan's fingers danced over the controls, following Nyx's every command. She had quickly taken charge of the situation, guiding him with the precision of someone who had faced much worse. The alarm system on the ship was blaring, warning them of incoming fire. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting as the enemy ships closed in. His heart raced, but his mind remained focused. With Nyx by his side, they might just pull this off. "We need to disable their lead ship," Nyx said, her voice calm, even as the ship rocked from a near miss. "It's the command vessel. If we take it out, the others will be disoriented. We'll have a chance to escape." Ethan nodded, quickly targeting the lead ship on his control panel. It was a massive vessel, far larger than the Phoenix, but Nyx's strategy made sense. Disabling the command ship would throw the entire fleet into confusion, giving them a fighting chance. He fired the first round of shots, aiming for the ship's shields, but the return fire was fierce. A blast struck the side of the Phoenix, and sparks flew from the console in front of him. Ethan swore under his breath, but didn't hesitate. He pulled the ship into a hard turn, narrowly avoiding another round of shots. "You're doing fine." Nyx's voice was steady, even reassuring. "Keep the pressure on them. Don't let up." Ethan gritted his teeth. No pressure, right? He adjusted the ship's course, dodging a few more shots as he lined up another target. Nyx's calmness, despite the chaos, was contagious. He focused harder, narrowing in on the lead ship's weak spot. "One more shot," he muttered to himself. With a quick press of the button, another volley of fire shot from the Phoenix, landing squarely on the command ship's main engine. The ship shuddered under the impact, and Ethan could see the shields flicker, weakening. "Got it," he called out. The massive Xerthian vessel began to veer off course, its engines sputtering as its shields failed. Within moments, the rest of the fleet began to scatter, unsure of what had just happened. For the first time since the battle began, the Phoenix was no longer the hunted. It was the hunter. But there was no time to celebrate. The rest of the fleet was still out there, and they weren't going to let a small ship like the Phoenix escape without a fight. "We got a few minutes before they regroup," Nyx said, scanning the fleet's movements. "We need to make a run for the nearby asteroid field. We'll lose them there." Ethan's mind raced. The asteroid field was a dangerous place to hide, full of debris and hidden threats, but it was their best shot at escaping. He set the coordinates, and the Phoenix shot forward, darting toward the cluster of asteroids ahead. The ship's engines roared as they made the jump, leaving the remaining Xerthian ships in their wake. As the asteroid field loomed closer, Ethan's thoughts turned to Nyx. She had been so calm throughout the chaos, so focused. The princess had proven herself to be far more than just a royal figure. She was a strategist, a leader. He had underestimated her when he first met her, thinking she was just a scared, exiled princess. But now, after seeing her in action, he realized just how wrong he had been. She wasn't just running from her past, she was fighting for her future. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, glancing at her. "That asteroid field is no joke. It could be a death trap." Nyx turned to him, her eyes sharp and unblinking. "I don't have time to be cautious. Thranak's men will be right behind us, and if we don't move fast, we'll be caught. Trust me. I know this area." Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. He had no choice but to trust her. She had led them this far, and he had to believe she knew what she was doing. The ship entered the asteroid field, the sharp rocks and floating debris passing by at breakneck speed. Ethan's fingers tightened on the controls as he skillfully maneuvered the ship through the maze of obstacles. His heart was pounding in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The Phoenix swerved between the larger asteroids, narrowly avoiding collisions as the field grew denser. The Xerthian fleet was not far behind. From the readouts on his control panel, Ethan could see that they were already adjusting their course, preparing to follow them into the field. He didn't know how much longer they could outrun them. "Just a little longer," Nyx murmured, her eyes fixed on the readings. "There's a hidden passage on the other side of the field. We'll lose them there." Ethan pushed the ship to its limits, his eyes darting back and forth between the asteroid field and the pursuing enemy ships. The Phoenix was fast, but the Xerthians had more firepower. They couldn't outrun them forever. "Do you have a plan for after we escape?" Ethan asked, glancing at her again. Nix's lips tightened into a faint smile, but there was little humor in it. "I always have a plan, Captain. For now, we get through this. After that, we figure out our next move." Ethan didn't ask any more questions. He just focused on the task at hand. The asteroid field was a deadly place to be, but they didn't have a choice. If they were going to survive, they had to make it to the other side. The ship swerved sharply as an asteroid barreled toward them, missing by inches. Ethan's breath was shallow, his mind focused entirely on the narrow path ahead. Nix's plan might be their only shot. As they neared the end of the field, Ethan could hear the soft click of Nix's breath as she braced herself. The final stretch was just ahead. This was it. They were on the verge of escape, but would they make it out alive? The asteroid field was a blur of rock and debris as the Phoenix tore through the tight maze. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he pushed the ship to its limits, narrowly avoiding collisions. The rumble of the ship's engines and the shrill blare of the alarms were the only sounds that filled the cockpit. Sweat dripped down his brow, but he didn't dare take his eyes off the path ahead. Behind them, the Xerthian fleet was closing in. The lead ships had managed to weave through the larger asteroids, and though they were slower, they were relentless. Ethan knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The field was their only hope. "Almost there," Nix said, her voice calm despite the tension in the air. She was sitting next to him now, watching the sensors, her focus sharp. "The passage is just ahead. We can lose them if we take it." Ethan nodded, his hand steady on the controls. He trusted her completely now. She had proven herself time and again. Her intelligence, her calm under pressure, and her knowledge of this galaxy were assets he hadn't expected. She wasn't just a fugitive princess. She was a warrior, a tactician, and a leader. Up ahead, the asteroid field seemed to split into two paths. One was filled with massive rocks and debris, while the other was narrower, more treacherous, and nearly impossible to navigate. "The narrow one," Nix instructed, her voice firm. Ethan didn't hesitate. With a sharp turn of the ship's controls, the Phoenix veered into the tight passage. The walls of the asteroid field closed in, and the ship was forced to maneuver between rocks that seemed to be closing in on them from all sides. The space between them was barely wide enough for the ship to fit, and every second felt like an eternity. Behind them, the Xerthians were undeterred. Their ships followed, just as fast and just as determined. But they weren't as agile as the Phoenix, and Ethan could see that they were already having trouble keeping up with the sharp turns. "We're almost there," Nix murmured, her eyes focused on the passage ahead. "Keep steady. Don't lose control." Ethan's hands were like iron on the controls. Every nerve in his body was tuned to the ship's every move. The passage was getting even tighter, with massive rocks on either side threatening to crush them at any moment. One wrong move, and they would be crushed between the stone walls. Ahead, a glowing, faintly blue energy field flickered in the darkness. A hidden entrance, an escape route that Nix knew well. "There," Nix pointed, "straight ahead. That's our escape." Ethan's pulse raced as he guided the ship toward the shimmering blue energy field. The passage was narrow, but the field ahead was just big enough for them to slip through. The Xerthian ships were not far behind, their guns firing sporadically, trying to force them out of their path. With a loud thrum, the ship shot forward, pushing the engines to their maximum capacity. The Phoenix hurtled toward the energy field. At the last possible moment, the ship shot through the glowing barrier, the walls of the asteroid field vanishing behind them. The ship jolted as they passed through, and for a moment, everything went silent. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They had done it. They had escaped. But the danger was far from over. The moment they crossed the threshold, the ship entered a completely new section of space, a place unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. It was a vast, empty stretch of nothingness, with stars that appeared dimmer than usual. There were no nearby planets, no satellites, just the quiet expanse of space. The energy field is a one-way passage, Nyx explained, her voice a little more relaxed now. It leads into a hidden part of space. We're safe for now, but it's not a perfect hideout. Ethan nodded, glancing at the control panel. The Xerthian fleet had been forced to stop at the energy barrier. They could no longer pursue. For the first time since they had entered the asteroid field, Ethan allowed himself a moment of relief. "We lost them," he said with a slight grin. "For now," Nyx replied, her gaze still scanning the surroundings. "We're safe here, but not for long. The passage is well known to those who hunt me. They'll regroup soon and start looking for us." Ethan glanced out the window. The stars were distant, their faint light barely illuminating the vast emptiness before them. It was strange, almost unnerving. He had spent so much of his life navigating the known parts of space, but this place felt wrong, like it was too quiet. "How do we keep moving?" Ethan asked. "I mean, where do we go from here? We can't stay in this empty stretch forever." Nyx's expression hardened. "I have a contact, a place where we can hide, at least for a while. But it's risky. If we go there, we'll be crossing into territory that Thranak's forces control." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of place is this?" "A trading hub," Nyx said, her tone clipped. "But not the kind you'll find on any star charts. It's a secret market, filled with smugglers and outlaws. It's neutral ground, but if Thranak's men are looking for us, they might be waiting there. Still, it's our best chance at regrouping and figuring out our next move." Ethan stared at the stars, weighing the options. A place like that could be a trap. But he had no better ideas. They couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, they would need help, more than just the two of them. "We don't have much choice, do we?" Ethan said, a wry smile crossing his face. Nyx met his gaze, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. "No, we don't." As the Phoenix drifted through the empty space, Ethan felt the weight of their situation settle on his shoulders once more. They had escaped the immediate danger, but Nyx's enemies were still out there. Thranak was still out there. But for now, they had a plan. And as long as they had that, there was still hope. The journey to the hidden trading hub was tense. Every moment of silence seemed to stretch longer, filled with the weight of their uncertain future. Nyx and Ethan sat side by side in the cockpit of the Phoenix, each lost in their own thoughts as the ship glided through the dim expanse of space. The stars outside the window seemed distant, their cold light doing little to ease the feeling of unease that gripped them. Ethan kept his hand steady on the controls, but his mind kept wandering back to their situation. The hidden market Nyx spoke of was their best chance to regroup, but it was also a dangerous gamble. The hub was a place of neutrality, meant for those who needed to escape the eyes of the law. It was filled with smugglers, criminals, and anyone who had a price to pay. But as Nyx had warned, if Thranak's forces were watching, the hub could quickly turn into a trap. Ethan glanced over at her. Nyx was calm, her expression unreadable, but there was a faint trace of worry in her eyes. She had led them through countless dangers already, and yet there was no sign of arrogance or pride in her demeanor. It was as if she knew better than to let her guard down. "How far are we?" Ethan asked, breaking the silence. Nyx's voice was steady as she answered. "A few hours. We'll be entering a system where the hub is hidden. The area is dense with asteroid belts and radiation fields, but it'll give us cover. The trick is getting past the security scanners. They'll be looking for ships like ours." Ethan nodded. He was familiar with these types of smuggling routes, places where the law had no reach, but where dangers lurked around every corner. He was no stranger to the risks of the illegal trade, having spent years as a mercenary before becoming a captain. Still, something about this felt different. It wasn't just the need for survival. It was about protecting someone who meant more than just a paycheck. As they approached the outer rim of the system, Nyx's fingers moved deftly over the control panel, adjusting the ship shields and sending a pulse through the scanners to avoid detection. The faintest hum filled the cockpit as the ship's systems adjusted to the changes. Ethan watched her, impressed by how easily she handled the controls. It was clear that she had more experience with this type of covert work than he had imagined. "They're not going to let us just walk in, are they?" Ethan asked, his voice light, but with an edge of concern. Nix gave him a side glance, her lips curling into a small smile. "No, they won't. But we have an advantage." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Nix met his gaze, her expression serious. "You." "Me?" Ethan asked, confused. "What do you mean by that?" "You're a captain of a ship, an outsider, someone they can't trust easily," Nix said, her voice low. "You're exactly the kind of person who can walk into the hub without drawing too much attention." Ethan's eyes widened as realization hit him. She wanted him to be the one to enter the market alone. "You want me to go in? Alone?" he asked incredulously. "Exactly," Nix replied, nodding firmly. "I can't risk being seen. If they recognize me, it'll be all over. You're the only one who can walk in without attracting too much suspicion." Ethan wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or worried. He had always been good at handling tough situations, but this was a whole new level of risk. Entering a place filled with smugglers and criminals alone was no small task. And with Thranak's men possibly lurking in the shadows, the danger was all the more real. "What's the plan once I'm inside?" Ethan asked, trying to focus on the task at hand. Nix quickly laid out the details. "Once you land, you'll need to find the information broker. His name is Varric. He deals in everything: information, weapons, even people. He's a neutral player, but he's the only one who might have the intel we need. You can trust him, but you need to approach him carefully. He'll know who you are as soon as you walk in, so don't try to hide anything. Just be straightforward, and don't make any enemies." Ethan absorbed the plan, nodding slowly. He knew how to handle himself in situations like this. It was a familiar game of diplomacy, mixed with a little bit of bluffing. He had played this role many times before. "Any other advice?" Ethan asked. Nix thought for a moment, her expression softening. "Just stay alert. Don't let anyone get too close. And if anything feels wrong, don't hesitate. Get back to the ship." Ethan gave her a small nod. "Understood. I'll be quick." As the Phoenix entered the designated zone, the stars ahead began to fade as the ship passed into the shadow of a large asteroid belt. The comm system crackled, and Nex's voice came through once more, this time with a quiet intensity. "We're almost there. Get ready." Ethan's pulse quickened. He wasn't used to feeling nervous, but there was something about this mission that felt different. He could sense the weight of the responsibility he carried, both for his own survival and for the safety of the woman beside him. Nix had trusted him to help her, and he wasn't about to let her down. The ship coasted through the asteroid field, slowly but surely making its way toward the hidden market. The system was dangerous and full of hidden threats, but Ethan felt a strange sense of purpose in that moment. He had come a long way from the mercenary he used to be, fighting for pay, fighting for survival. Now he was fighting for something bigger, the future of an entire empire, and the life of a woman who had become something far more than just a princess to him. As the hub finally came into view, a sprawling underground station built into the heart of an asteroid, Ethan prepared to make his move. The journey to this point had been dangerous, but now the real test began. Would he be able to survive in this den of thieves and secrets? And would Nex's plan work? Ethan stood in the dimly lit hangar of the hidden trading hub, the heavy doors of the Phoenix closing behind him with a quiet thud. The market was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a chaotic, buzzing place, filled with the hum of voices, the clink of metals, and the faint glow of neon lights. The air was thick with the smell of fuel, rust, and something he couldn't quite place. Ships of all shapes and sizes lined the edges of the vast space, while figures in hooded cloaks and armor moved about, trading goods and exchanging whispers. It was the kind of place where no one asked too many questions and where everyone had a price. Ethan could already feel the weight of the stares that followed him as he walked further into the marketplace. The eyes of smugglers, bounty hunters, and exiled refugees all seemed to lock onto him, sizing him up. He pulled the collar of his jacket up, trying to blend in as best as he could. He was just another mercenary here, just another face among many. But inside, his mind was alert, constantly scanning for danger. He had to find Varric, the information broker, and fast. Nex's words echoed in his mind. Be straightforward. Don't make any enemies. Ethan wasn't sure how easy it would be to follow her advice in a place like this, but he was going to try. As he moved deeper into the market, he couldn't help but notice the way the traders conducted business. Most of them were huddled in tight, guarded circles, their transactions quick and silent. Some exchanged tech, others passed crates of goods that were probably stolen or illegal in some way. The market was a living organism, a place where deals were made in the shadows, and only the strongest, or the most cunning, survived. It didn't take long before he found a stall that stood out from the rest. A small booth tucked in the corner of the market, guarded by two hulking figures who looked like they'd be just as happy cracking skulls as they were guarding the entrance. The sign above the stall read simply, Varric's Vault. Ethan hesitated for a moment, eyeing the guards. They were well armed and looked more than capable of dealing with unwanted attention. But he had no choice. He had to get in. He took a steady breath and approached the booth. As soon as the guards saw him, their eyes narrowed, but neither of them made a move. They weren't in a hurry to start a fight, but they were watching him closely. Ethan stepped up to the counter, his voice steady. I need to speak with Varric. One of the guards grunted, nodding toward the back of the stall. Go on. Then. Ethan didn't waste time. He passed the guards and walked deeper into the small booth, where he found a man sitting at a desk, hunched over a glowing datapad. He was thin, his sharp features partially obscured by a patchy beard, but his eyes were bright and calculating. Varric didn't look up as Ethan entered. What do you want? Varric asked without glancing up from his screen. I'm looking for information, Ethan replied. I've got a job, and I need to know about the Xerthian forces in this sector. Varric finally looked up, his eyes scanning Ethan with a sharpness that made him feel like a piece of meat being examined. After a long pause, Varric spoke again, his voice low. You don't just come here for information. You come with a price. What's yours? Ethan hesitated. It was a dangerous game to play, but he had come this far. I have credits, he said, and I can offer more. You help me, and I'll make sure you get what you want. Varric's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't one of friendliness. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what he was dealing with. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk. You're a mercenary, aren't you? Varric asked, his voice cutting through the noise of the market around them. I can tell by the way you carry yourself. You've been in the game for a long time. Ethan didn't answer, but his eyes remained locked on Varric's. All right, Varric said, leaning forward. I'll tell you what you want to know. But first, you need to do something for me. Ethan's patience was wearing thin, but he held his ground. What do you need? Varric's eyes gleamed with something dark, something calculating. There's a shipment coming in, something valuable. I need you to make sure it reaches its destination safely. You help me, and I'll give you the information you need. Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This was a trap, he could feel it, but there was no way out now. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to help Nyx and escape the Xerthian forces, he had no choice but to play along. He didn't have to think long. Fine, he said, his voice hardening. I'll do it, but after that you give me the information. No games. Varric's grin widened. Deal. With that, Ethan turned and walked out of the booth, the weight of the deal hanging heavily on his shoulders. The market was still as chaotic as ever, and the noise seemed louder now, the tension in the air thicker. He had made his choice, and now he had to see it through. As he moved through the market toward the designated rendezvous point for the shipment, Ethan's thoughts turned to Nex. He had to get back to her. They were in this together, and no matter how dangerous this deal was, he wasn't going to let anything happen to her. The next step would be critical. If he failed here, everything they had worked for would fall apart. And in a place like this, failure could mean death.